All right, let's dive right into this explainer and unpack the absolutely wild, rapid-fire events of the Wallachian Revolution of 1848. We're looking at a time when the intense spark of liberal and nationalist ideals collided head-on with the cold, hard realities of imperial geopolitics. It's an incredible story of passionate intellectuals, restless peasants, and some seriously complex maneuvering by neighboring empires.
We're actually kicking things off today with a bit of a historical paradox. Think about it. How exactly does an uprising that gets completely crushed in just a matter of months end up laying the successful groundwork for the modern Romanian state? It sounds totally counterintuitive, right? A total military defeat leading to a massive political victory just over a decade later.
To figure that out, we're going to map out this whole journey. We'll start with the seeds of the revolution, move into the outbreak and the provisional government, then look at their internal divides and reforms, followed by their diplomatic efforts in the Regency, and finally, the suppression and its lasting aftermath.
All right, part one, the seeds of the revolution.
To really get this, we have to look at the intense pressure cooker that was Wallachia in the decades before 1848. This wasn't just some spontaneous outburst, you know? The conditions for a massive upheaval had been brewing for a long time, built on profound social and political inequalities. Over 80% of the population were rural peasants forced into corvée, which is essentially unpaid forced labor for the ruling boyar nobility. And looking at their economy, it was incredibly stagnant. I mean, maize made up 81% of their output just for basic survival, while the elites basically pocketed all the profits from exporting other grains.
And politically, Wallachia was stuck in this brutal geopolitical vice. They were trapped right between their Ottoman overlords and their Russian protectors, all while the local boyar class kept an absolute iron grip on power. The framework holding this whole rigged system together was called the Regulamentul Organic. It basically locked out the vast majority of regular people from having any political voice whatsoever, completely cementing an oligarchic status quo for the elite families.
Which brings us to part two, the outbreak and the provisional government.
So inspired by the springtime of peoples sweeping across Europe, all this simmering discontent finally boiled over. When news of revolutions in places like Paris and Vienna hit Wallachia, local intellectuals, secret societies like Frăția, and sympathetic military officers knew it was go time. On June 9th at a place called Islaz, revolutionaries laid out this radical 22-point vision for internal regeneration. The Islaz Proclamation was literally a masterclass in revolutionary demands. They called for massive social changes, like ending corvée labor, emancipating Roma slaves, and giving land back to the peasants. But here's the clever part. They strategically professed loyalty to the Ottoman Sultan, hoping to avoid an immediate foreign invasion.
Armed with these demands, roughly 10,000 demonstrators completely swarmed Bucharest. They actually forced Prince Bibescu to accept their constitution, abdicate his throne, and flee the city. The energy must have been electric. They marched the Romanian tricolor through the streets, and in this huge, deeply symbolic moment, they publicly set fire to the oppressive Regulamentul Organic and the official register of boyar ranks. Just like that, a provisional government was instantly formed.
Now for part three, internal divides and reforms.
Because as we all know, taking power is one thing, but governing a newly liberated, heavily divided society, that's a whole different ballgame. The new provisional government had to actually implement these sweeping reforms, and serious ideological cracks showed up almost on day one. To understand this divide, we just need to look at two major players, Nicolae Bălcescu, the fiery radical, and Ion Heliad Ridulescu, the cautious moderate. These two guys basically embodied the philosophical split that would end up paralyzing the government.
Here's how it broke down. Bălcescu and the radicals were pushing aggressively for immediate land redistribution to the peasants. They knew they needed the rural majority to back the revolution if it was going to survive. But Ridulescu and the moderates, they were terrified of a backlash. They favored gradualism and appeasing the boyars, mostly because they feared that seizing elite lands would tank the economy and hand foreign empires the absolute perfect excuse to invade. This fundamental disagreement caused a massive fracture in their leadership.
Moving on to part four, diplomatic efforts and the Regency.
So while the government is busy arguing with itself over land reform, the geopolitical vice outside starts closing in on them. They knew perfectly well that without foreign recognition, this grand experiment was totally doomed. Seeking to avoid annihilation, they went into overdrive, lobbying the Ottoman Empire, desperately hoping to counter the looming threat of the Russian army. They actually invited Ottoman emissaries right into Bucharest to negotiate. And when the Ottoman envoy, Suleiman Pasha, arrived, he was initially greeted warmly, but his main advice was essentially tone down your radical edge if you want to keep international observers happy. This led to an absolute administrative scramble. To appease the Ottomans, the radical provisional government actually stepped down, diluting itself into a three-member moderate regency just to survive the pressure. But showing weakness like that is dangerous. During this vulnerable window, conservative elites, backed by figures like metropolitan neophyte, tried to launch counter-revolutionary coups, and while the revolutionaries managed to fend those coups off, the chaos completely shattered their momentum. They lost precious time, and even worse, they lost crucial peasant support.
Finally, Part 5, Suppression and the Lasting Aftermath.
By autumn, that careful diplomatic balancing act completely unraveled. The imperial powers had simply seen enough of this liberal experiment on their borders. Just look at how fast this all happened. The whole dream was crushed rapidly once Russia pressured the Sultan into a coordinated two-empire military clampdown on Wallachia. The revolutionaries frantically lobbied Paris and London, but the Western powers weren't about to intervene militarily. Tsar Nicholas I of Russia forced the issue, and the Ottomans marched right in to shut it down.
Now, despite a truly heroic final stand by local firefighters at Dilu Spiri in September, the revolutionaries just didn't have a standing army to defend themselves. A small detachment of firemen fought bravely against the incoming Ottoman troops, but the city fell pretty much immediately. The combined imperial forces easily occupied the capital and slapped the old regime right back into place.
The immediate fallout was brutal. Exactly 91 revolutionary leaders were formally banished into exile, forced to flee to cities like Paris and Istanbul. On paper, it looked like a total disaster. The oppressive Regulamentul Organic was restored, a pro-Russian prince was put in charge, and the brilliant minds who sparked the whole thing were kicked out of their own homeland.
But here is where it gets really interesting. Instead of just giving up, these exiles completely transformed their strategy. From cafes in Paris, they organized a massive, clandestine propaganda campaign that kept their liberal nationalist ideals alive across Europe. They aggressively lobbied Western powers, winning crucial sympathy from France and Britain. And maybe most importantly, they realized their only real path forward was cross-principality solidarity, fusing the goals of Wallachia and Moldavia into one unified, unstoppable mission.
Plus, the revolution had permanently awakened the masses. We're talking about securing nearly 100,000 signatures on petitions down the line, proving that the people's desire for a unified, modern nation was not going away. You know, you can crush a provisional government with an army, but you really can't put 100,000 politically engaged citizens back into the box of absolute serfdom once they've had a taste of freedom.
So that brings us right back to the question we started with. When these exact same exiles successfully united the principalities under Alexandru Ioan Cuza just a little over a decade later, didn't they prove that the crushed 1848 revolution was actually a delayed, magnificent victory? They built their new nation directly on the blueprint they had so fiercely debated during those chaotic 3 months. It really makes you wonder, are there any modern political failures we're seeing today that are actually just the rough drafts of tomorrow's great triumphs? Keep exploring, keep questioning, and we'll see you in the next explainer.